into cooking, maybe adding some more herbs or spices or something, or I wasn't sure. And then a couple more weeks went by, it kept tasting better. And then after about 6 or 7 weeks of eating the same food, I realised that this is exactly the same food as 6 weeks ago. So what had changed? What had changed was that due to being in retreat, my mind was calming down, which means my craving and attachment was slowly subsiding. And therefore, I was actually enjoying the food much more. I can honestly say at that time, I'd never enjoyed food that much ever before in my life. And it wasn't anything special, this food. And also, I was in a cabin that had a side of a mountain, 2,000 metres, beautiful, spacious view, Mediterranean in the distance. But again, if we go to somewhere that has a very nice view, it doesn't take too many days of being there before we don't even notice the view anymore. In fact, it's after some while, it just becomes very ordinary. My experience, again, exact opposite. The view kept getting more and more beautiful. And also then very little tiny insignificant things. A little tiny flower after some weeks was becoming very attractive. I was going, wow, that's so amazing. So what I found was that due to my craving and attachment subsiding, I was enjoying the simple pleasures in life much more than I'd ever done before. So if we reduce our craving and attachment, this is what's going to happen. And then when that's explained, people go, okay, maybe that's true, let me check that out. But I definitely need attachment, because I need attachment to have a relationship. Without attachment, there'd be no basis for a relationship. Again, it's the exact opposite. Craving and attachment interferes with our relationships. And part of the confusion here is simply terminology, the word attachment. So remember here, when we use the word attachment, it's defined as a mental factor that sees its object as attractive, it exaggerates the object's attractiveness, and then wishes to possess and hold the object. Whereas when we come to talk about relationships, then in psychology, when they use the word attachment, I think it's not defined like that. In fact, they talk about attachment theory in psychology, where they talk about actually there are healthy forms of attachment we need to actively cultivate. And the classic example that's often given is a strong bond between mother and child. Simply a strong bond between mother and child is not attachment according to Buddhism. In fact, according to Buddhism, we need to have a strong bond between ourselves and everyone else. So again, I think it comes down to the way the word attachment's used. It's not the same in psychology and in Buddhism. So it's not like who's right. Attachment says we need to cultivate, Buddhism says we need to get rid of. The thing is to understand that this same word is used in two slightly different ways. And so here, then when we talk about in a relationship, attachment actually sees the other person as an object, a thing to satisfy me. Because attachment sees that person as the source of my happiness. So actually, attachment doesn't see the other person as a person. Attachment sees the other person as a thing to satisfy me. So not very nice. Whereas love or loving kindness in a relationship is simply the wish for them to be happy. And the fine print, of course, is without expecting anything in return. What we would call unconditional love, no strings attached love. Conditional love, strings attached love, is love polluted by attachment. And that sounds like this. I will love you as long as, and here comes the condition, as long as you keep saying and doing things that make me happy. Otherwise, no. So that's all attachment speaking. That's all attachment. So to distinguish loving kindness from attachment in a relationship, loving kindness is saying, I want you to be happy. Attachment is saying, I want you to make me happy. So attachment's all about me, 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 and doesn't care in the slightest about the other person. What we need to realize, of course, is in all our relationships, these two factors are mixed together. And that our job is to distinguish these two factors, the healthy part of loving kindness and the unhealthy part of attachment, and then to increase the loving kindness as much as possible and decrease the attachment as much as possible. And then our relationships will improve. And to appreciate that attachment is pervasive in our life. And not to have this expectation by next week I'll get rid of attachment. That's not going to happen. In fact, this world we live in is often referred to in Buddhism as the desire realm. Why? Because desire, craving, attachment is the main driving force in our life. So this is something we'll need to work on for the rest of our life, this reducing craving and attachment. But the more we can do that, the better our relationships will be. And also here, then, you often hear Buddhism saying something like, we are to love everyone equally. And then when we hear that, we end up often with a very strange idea about what that means. We think that that means that I need to spend equal amount of time with everyone and behave in the same way with everyone. This would be a complete disaster. So remember, love or loving kindness is not an emotion, it's not a behaviour. It's an aspirational wish. So when Buddhism encourages us to love everyone equally, what Buddhism's saying is to equally wish everyone to be happy. That we can aspire to. And then how we would express that loving kindness to our partner would probably be in an intimate way and maybe spend a lot of time with them. We would express that same loving kindness to our family members in a different way and spend less time with them. And we would express that same loving kindness to our work colleagues and neighbours in a very different way and maybe spend no time with them. So when that's explained about relationships, then people go, okay, maybe that's true. Let's check that out as well. Maybe there's a healthy part, loving kindness, unhealthy part, attachment, increased loving kindness, decreased attachment. Okay. But still, I need attachment. Because I'm a creative person and I need attachment to be creative. Again, it's the exact opposite. Craving and attachment and other mental afflictions interfere with creativity. And here, of course, we're talking about the source of creativity. There's no doubt that mental afflictions like craving, attachment, jealousy, anger provide a lot of subject matter, material for creativity, art, music, and so forth. No doubt. But when we talk about source of creativity, the source of creativity is not the mental afflictions. Source of creativity comes from deep within our own mind. And as long as our mind is dominated by mental afflictions like craving, attachment, jealousy, anger, we're actually suffocating our creativity. So if we start to remove or reduce craving, attachment, jealousy, and so forth, you'll find that your creativity will manifest more and more. And also now, we often tend to be creative for a little bit of a selfish motivation. By, look at me, how wonderful a musician or artist I am, aren't I good? Whereas I think the truly great creative people on the planet are the ones who use their creative talents to inspire others for a good purpose. So if we start to reduce our mental afflictions, craving, attachment, and one of those, of course, is selfishness, then not only will we become more creative, we'll become more creative for a more meaningful reason. So therefore, if we work to reduce and eliminate attachment, we'll enjoy the simple pleasures in life more, our relationships will improve, we'll become more creative for a more meaningful reason. So it's a win-win situation. Any questions about attachment? And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how to deal with attachment. But before that, any questions of anything we've covered so far?
I have two questions. So how you reduce attachment? This is the...
How to reduce.
So how we reduce attachment.
That's the next topic.
Okay. And the question is the meditation what we did. I know it's influence on ourselves, But maybe the energy I'm asking can influence on others.
Okay. So remember here, with these sorts of practices, they are training the mind. So we are, in this particular case, we are increasing our mind of loving kindness, which means that then outside of meditation, we're more likely to be kind to others and help others. So these exercises, these meditations are mental exercises. But of course, together with the mental, there's physical. Particularly at a subtle level, there's subtle energetic. So, of course, even at that level, we can have an impact on others. That's true, you know. And so, but this practice is not about working at that level directly. We're not trying to send good energy. We're not trying to push away bad energy and so forth. That's nothing to do with this practice here. It's all purely at the mental level. So we need to be aware of that. And that becomes more important when we look at the compassion practice tomorrow. So how to deal with attachment. Okay. So, of course, the first thing is to have a clear understanding of what we mean by attachment. Because otherwise, what to do if we don't have a clear understanding of what it is? So that's what we've tried to do in this session, to clearly define what do we mean by attachment in this context, and to see how attachment only leads to suffering. Because if we can have that clear understanding, from that, we'll want to eliminate attachment. Without the aspiration to eliminate attachment, we're just going to get caught up in it, because sometimes we'll think, oh, this is useful. It's good that I have attachment. So to have that clear understanding can be the starting point. The second point, and that's something we've already touched on here in terms of this genuine happiness, is to really cultivate this view of genuine happiness. Because as long as we have the worldview that pleasure equals happiness, i.e. the source of my happiness is out there, we're stuck. We're always going to have craving and attachment, because those things out there, they're the source of my happiness. I need to get those things. So the natural consequence of that view is craving and attachment. So if we really want to start to deal with attachment, we need to shift this worldview, start to work on that, to really understand that the source of happiness is within and not out there. Then, how to actually deal with attachment when it's arising. Of course, the long-term strategy for dealing with attachment is that attachment, like all other mental afflictions, comes from ignorance, from our distorted view of reality. So the long-term strategy for attachment, for anger, for jealousy, for all mental afflictions is to cut ignorance, because that's the cause. So the long-term strategy is the Vipassana practice, particularly what's called the Vipassana practice of emptiness, which we'll briefly touch on day 9. So that's the long-term strategy, is work on the Vipassana practice, and that will completely eliminate attachment once we've eliminated the distorted view of reality. But while we're working on that, we need to have a short-term strategy that we can at least start to reduce our attachment now, because if we have a lot of attachment and jealousy and anger now, that's going to make it very difficult to do any Vipassana practice or Shamatha practice. So we need an effective short-term strategy to at least reduce the attachment. The basis of that short-term strategy is mindfulness. Because without mindfulness, we're just stimulus reaction. Some stimulus comes, we react. And then after the event, we go, oh, I shouldn't have done that. So the key here to deal with attachment, the key to deal with any mental affliction in the short term, is we need more mindfulness. And that's, of course, what we're strengthening in the Shamatha practice. Because we have a little window of opportunity from when the attachment starts to arise until it's taken control of our mind and we're out of control. That window may only be a second or two, but with mindfulness we can catch that window. We can notice the craving and attachment arising. Then we're still in control. And then there's a few things we can do. One thing we can do is just observe. Just watch that craving and attachment as it's arising. Because if we can watch the craving and attachment, we're free of it. We're not caught up in it. And also, now by watching the craving and attachment directly, we're no longer focused on the thing that's feeding the craving and attachment, so it can't go anywhere. So we can simply watch the craving and attachment arise and pass. And that's something we're going to be cultivating, that ability here in this practice of observing the mind day after tomorrow. So that's one thing we can do. But in addition to just observing arising, passing, we can do what's called apply antidotes. And we can apply antidotes from the two main wings of practice of wisdom and compassion. And there are a number of antidotes here from the wisdom wing, but I'll just mention one that can be very effective, and that is this idea of impermanence. The fact that everything's changing moment by moment. So if we can see things experientially as changing moment by moment, then actually there's nothing for a craving and attachment to grab hold of. So actually often in the text, when they talk about what is the antidote to attachment, the answer is often impermanence. But of course we don't just mean intellectual understanding, because all of us now, I think in this room, intellectually accept everything is changing moment by moment. Is that helping us in our life? Not really. So Vipassana practice of impermanence is internalizing that to make it experiential, so that we can begin to experientially see things as changing moment by moment. If we can do that, then there's nothing for attachment to grab hold of. So impermanence here is a very good antidote to attachment craving. There are other antidotes here, and particularly this idea of emptiness, but we'll look at that on day 9. And then from the compassion wing of practice, then again, the craving and attachment, when we're talking about a person, what we can do here is shift perspective. Because generally with craving and attachment, we have a very narrow perspective of how is this situation affecting me? It's all about me. And that person seems to be the source of my happiness, therefore attachment. Whereas if we can shift the perspective to second person perspective, meaning trying to see how that person is seeing the situation. And if we can do that, then instead of attachment, it'll be more easy to have loving kindness, the wish for them to be happy. So that can be very helpful in the compassion wing, is just shifting that perspective Always try to see the situation from the other person's perspective. So that's very briefly some antidotes. Any questions about that before we take an afternoon tea break?
I have a question from earlier.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Historically, you don't really see too many great meditators producing great art. So I struggle with the notion.
Oh, I don't know about that. I think you look in Tibetan Buddhist temples, there's amazing art there.
True.
And a lot of that is from direct experience of the meditator.
In the current Western world, I'll limit the category.
Yeah.
In the current Western world, most great art is produced by
Because in the current Western modern world, there's no idea of shamatha practice that we can develop. In fact, it's generally accepted that we can, maximum attention skill is maybe less than 10 seconds. There's no way we can develop any attention beyond that. So there's no idea that this is possible. That's, I think, the main reason. So I think you'll find that if some great artists, musicians and so forth really, particularly the shamatha practice, if they really develop that, I think the level of what they produce would go to a whole new dimension. But unfortunately, until Buddhism really came to the West, there was no idea that this was possible. In fact, it was thought it was impossible. And so, of course, no one's ever going to try to do that. And I think that's unfortunate. No?
Yes.
I'm asking about the craving and the permanent, like for food.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so at the minute of the craving, so you suggest to be aware of the sensation and the thoughts and
Right.
be with all the suffering of these sensations,
Right.
the hurting,
Right.
pain.
Right. So what we're suggesting here is that if craving and attachment for whatever, food, whatever it is, arises, is just observe that craving and attachment.
Where it is rising. Where?
Okay.
It's not only thoughts.
Yeah. So one thing we don't want to try to do is block it. Because if you try and block it, you're trying to suppress it. So the two things we don't want to do is get caught up in it and don't try to block it. Both of those is like throwing petrol on the fire. It's just going to get much worse. You'll get overwhelmed. So they're the two things we want to avoid. Following, getting caught up, and trying to block it. The middle way is just observe it. Because if we can observe the craving and attachment, we're free of it. And as I mentioned, if we're observing the craving and attachment, we're no longer focusing on the thing that's causing it. So there's nothing feeding it. Now the reality is, of course, as a beginner, our mindfulness is not very good. Our mental afflictions are very strong. So to think that from one day to the next, if we have a strong craving for food, that we'll be able to just watch it, that's completely unrealistic. But if we really start to work on this in meditation and work on it in daily life, you'll notice that initially small cravings that arise, you'll be able to watch them. Even to the point where you'll start to notice in daily life where you have little cravings before, you'll notice, oh, I don't have that anymore. What happened? And what happened was that now, because we're more mindfulness, we're just noticing that. And it's not going anywhere. It just goes... So you'll notice, without even really being very conscious about it, is that little things that used to cause craving don't do anymore. But of course, big things still. But if we keep working on that, we'll be able to be more and more present with stronger things. Now, one thing that can help initially for things that come up quite strong and we're not able to just be present is move into the body. Because every mental affliction has something happening corresponding in the body. And often people find it easier to notice what's going on in the body than look at the mental affliction direct. So if you're finding something strong coming up, just go into the body and watch the sensations in your body corresponding to that mental affliction. And so that can be also very helpful as a backup.
And the sensations are not very are hurting.
No, they're only hurting because you have resistance, you have aversion. It's because you don't like those sensations. That's why they hurt. For example, you know, and here in Israel, I think in the summer, 40 degrees, you know, you go out in 40 degrees, it hurts, no? You're out there and you go, oh, so hot, I'm suffering, yeah? Then you go into a sauna, which is 80 degrees, twice as hot, and you go, oh, so nice. So what's hurting is your idea that 40 degrees, I don't like that, I want that to go away. So what you'll find is if you can let go of that aversion, you can have very strong things happening in the body and they won't hurt. They'll be strong, but you'll be able to sit with it and go, oh, okay. But that'll take time, of course. Okay, let's take a break there, run over time a bit. So afternoon tea break, and then 3:45 with Sippy next door, the yoga session. So it's an excellent opportunity here for you to get the body working, flexible, so we can sit better and better in the coming days. So that's an hour from 3:45 till 4:45, and then a short break, and then come back at 5, and we'll go back to the Shamatha practice, working at the abdomen, and then some more discussion about that. And then time for you to have some question answer as well. But let's take a break now.